Jean-Roch Coignet's memoirs offer a vivid and personal glimpse into the life of a French soldier who served under Napoleon Bonaparte. Born in 1776, Coignet joined the army as a young man and rose through the ranks to become a captain, participating in many of the major battles and campaigns of the Napoleonic Wars. He is conscripted into the army in 1799. Let's begin. On the 6th of Fructidor, year 7, 2 gendarmes arrived to give me travel orders to depart on the 10th of Fructidor for Fontainebleau. I immediately made preparations to leave. They wanted to replace me, but I thanked them with tears. I promise you that I will return with a silver rifle, or I will be killed. My farewells were sad. I was showered with respect by everyone, escorted part of the way, and warmly embraced. With my small bundle under my arm, I went to sleep at Rozoy, the first military stage. I went to get my lodging ticket, which I presented to my host, who paid no attention to me. I went out and bought some stew meat, which the butcher placed in my hand. I was hurt to see this meat in the palm of my hand. I handed it to my hostess to kindly cook it for me and went to get vegetables. Eventually, my little stew was prepared. My hosts then graciously spoke to me, but I paid them no mind. The next day, I arrived in Fontainebleau, where officers, unenthusiastic about service, received us and placed us in a barracks in very poor condition. Our fine battalion formed within a fortnight. It was 800 men strong. Due to a lack of discipline, a revolt quickly ensued, and half of them went home. The battalion commander reported this to Paris, and they were given 15 days to rejoin the battalion, or they would be marked as deserters and prosecuted as such. General Lefebvre was immediately sent to organize us. Companies were formed, grenadiers drawn. I was among this company of 120 men, and we were quickly outfitted. We received everything in full and immediately began exercises twice a day. The latecomers were brought back by the gendarmes, and we were brought to order. On Sundays, it was the decadee for the entire battalion. We had to sing of victory, and the officers brandished their swords. The church resounded, and then we shouted, "Long live the Republic!" Every evening, around the Tree of Liberty, which was in the beautiful street, we had to sing "The Aristocrats to the Lantern." How amusing it was! This life lasted about 2 months until the news spread in the newspapers that General Bonaparte had landed, was coming to Paris, and that he was a great general. Our officers became mad with joy because the battalion commander knew him, and it was a joy in the battalion. We were inspected for cleanliness. We practiced presenting arms, crossing bayonets. They wanted to make us soldiers in 2 months. Our hands were calloused from hitting the butt of our rifles, all day under arms. Our officers adjusted our uniforms, making every effort to ensure nothing was missing. Finally, a courier arrived, announcing that Bonaparte would pass through Fontainebleau and spend the night there. We were kept under arms all day, and nothing came. They did not want to give us time to eat. The bakers and caterers of the main street made a good profit. Sentries were placed in the forest. Every moment we were called to arms, and everyone went to the balcony, but in vain, as Bonaparte did not arrive until midnight. In the main street of Fontainebleau, where he dismounted, he was delighted to see such a fine battalion. He called the officers around him and ordered them to leave the next day for Courbevoie. He got back into his carriage, and we shouted, "Long live Bonaparte!" and returned to our barracks to pack our bags, wake up the laundresses, and pay everywhere. We went to sleep in Corbeil, where we were received as locals by all the inhabitants, and the next day we left for Courbevoie, where we found a barracks devoid of all necessities, not even straw to sleep on. We were forced to gather vine props to warm ourselves and boil our pots. We stayed only 3 days before receiving orders to leave for the military school, where we were placed in rooms containing only straw mattresses, at least 100 men per room. Then we were given 3 packets of cartridges, 15 per packet, and 3 days later we were sent to Saint-Cloud, where we saw cannons everywhere and cavalrymen wrapped in their cloaks. We were told they were heavy cavalry, that they were like thunder when they charged the enemy, covered in iron. All of this was untrue. They only had ugly tricorn hats and 2 iron plates crossed on their hat forms. These men looked like large peasants with heavy horses that made the ground tremble and 4-foot sabres. These were the men of our heavy cavalry who would later become our fine cuirassiers known as the Iron Vests. Finally, this regiment was at Saint-Cloud. The grenadiers of the Directory and the 500 formed a line in the first courtyard. A half-brigade of infantry was near the main gate, and 4 companies of grenadiers were behind the Directory's guard. We heard cries of "Long live Bonaparte" from all sides, and he appeared. The drums beat to the fields. He passed in front of the fine grenadier corps, saluted everyone, made us form a line, and spoke to the leaders. He was on foot, wearing a small hat and a small sword. He climbed the steps alone. Suddenly we heard cries, and Bonaparte came out, drew his small sword, and went back up with a squad of guard grenadiers. Then the cries grew louder. The grenadiers were on the porch and in the entrance. We saw large gentlemen being pushed out through the windows. Their cloaks, fine hats and plumes fell to the ground. The grenadiers tore the braids from these fine cloaks. Bonaparte called his brother Lucien, who was the president, and told him to sit in the fine chair, with Cambaceres on his right and Lebrun on his left. And there they were installed. At 3 o'clock, we were ordered to leave for Paris, but the grenadiers did not leave with us. We were starving. Upon arrival, we were given a distribution of brandy. The Parisians crowded around us for news from Saint-Cloud. We could not pass through the streets to reach the Luxembourg, where we were placed in a chapel upon entering the garden. We had to climb steps. And then, on the left, there was a large vaulted room, said to be the sacristy, where we set up large pots for 400 grenadiers. In front of the building there were beautiful lime trees, but the beautiful square in front of the palace was nothing but demolished ruins. In this beautiful garden only the old chestnut trees, which are still there, remained, with an exit behind, at the end of our chapel. It was pitiful to see this beautiful garden in ruins. A fine grenadier arrived with the battalion commander, who had us take up arms to receive Mr. Thomas, or Thomé, as a lieutenant in the 96th Demi-Brigade. There, on the spot, he told us, "It was I who saved Bonaparte's life with my comrade. The first time he entered the hall, 2 men charged at him with daggers, and it was my comrade and I who parried the blows. Then he went out. They shouted, 'Outlaw!' That is when he drew his sword and had us cross bayonets, shouting, 'Out of the hall!' calling his brother. All the beaten pigeons fled through the windows, and we took control of the hall. He also told us that Josephine had given him a ring worth 15,000 francs, forbidding him to sell it, saying she would provide for all his needs. Our fine battalion was definitively incorporated into the 96th Demi-Brigade of the line, seasoned soldiers with distinguished officers who led us firmly. Our colonel was named Mr. Lepreux, a native of Paris, a good soldier, and kind to his officers. Our captain was named Merle, who possessed all military talents, severe, just, always with his grenadiers during distributions, at exercises twice a day, strict on discipline. He attended meals. He made us learn to handle weapons. All our time was occupied. Within 3 months, our companies could manoeuvre in front of the first consul. I became very skilled with weapons. I was agile, had 2 good fencing masters who pushed me. They had tested me and felt my belt. They courted me. I paid for their drinks. That was necessary for these 2 drunkards. I had no reason to complain, for after 2 months they put me to a severe test. They picked a quarrel with me, and I can say without reason, "Come on," said this braggart. "Take your sabre. I want to draw a little blood from you." "Well, let's see, Mr. Rascal. Get a witness." I have none. And my old master, who was in on the plot, said to me, "Do you want me to be your witness?" "I would like that, Father Palbrois." "Let's go," he said. "Enough talk." And off we went, all 4 of us. We did not go far into the Luxembourg garden. There were old ruins, and they led me between old walls. There, coat off, I got into guard. Well, "Attack first," I said to him. "No," he said. "Well, en garde." I lunged at him. I did not give him time to recover. My master intervened, sabre in hand. I pushed him back, saying, "Get out of the way so I can kill him. Come on, that's enough. Embrace each other." And we went to drink a bottle. I said, "And that drop of blood, he does not want it any more." It was a joke, my master told me. I was recognized as a good grenadier. I saw where they were headed. It was a test to make me pay the bill. I did so willingly, and they appreciated it. The grenadier who wanted to kill me in the morning became my best friend, always respectful to me, offering small services. My two masters pushed me hard. 4 hours of exercise, 2 hours in the fencing room, making 6 hours a day. This life lasted 3 months, and I paid for many drinks for these drunkards. Fortunately, Mr. and Mrs. Potier had filled my belt. I felt the benefit for a long time. We spent the winter in Paris. The first consul's review took place in February at the Tuileries. The 3 demi-brigades, 24th Light, 43rd Line and 96th Line, formed a division of 15,000 men, commanded by General Chambalhac. The first consul had us manoeuvre, passed through the ranks, and was pleased. He called the colonels and wanted to see the conscripts separately. The company of grenadiers from the Seine-et-Marne battalion was presented to him. He told our captain Merle to have us manoeuvre in front of him. He was surprised, "But these are old soldiers you are making manoeuvre." "No," said the captain, "this is the company of the auxiliary battalion formed in Fontainebleau. I am pleased with this company. Have them rejoin the battalion. Be ready to leave." We received orders to leave for the camp of Dijon, which did not exist, for I never saw it. The entire division left together for Corbeil, where Chambarlac had us camp in the vineyards of the brave department of Seine-et-Marne, which had made so many sacrifices for our battalion. All along the way we camped similarly. From Auxerre he took us to Saint-Nitas. The citizens wanted to lodge us, bringing carts of wood and straw. All of this was useless. We had to burn their props and cut their poplars. We were called the Brigands of Chambarlac, yet he did not sleep at the bivouac with his soldiers. This life lasted until Dijon, where we were housed by the bourgeois. We stayed there for nearly 6 weeks. General Lannes formed his vanguard and left for Switzerland. We left last from Dijon for Auxonne, where we stayed. The next day to Dole, where we only slept, and from there to Poligny. From there to Morez. The next day we slept at Les Rousses. From there to Nyon, where we held a small assembly in a beautiful plain. We were reviewed by the first consul, assisted by his generals, including Lannes. We manoeuvred and formed squares. The consul kept us all day. He had us march, and the next day we left for Lausanne, a very beautiful city. The consul stayed there, and we were well received. From these parts you arrive on a wooded height overlooking the entire expanse of the land. You can see Geneva to the right across the lake. You can see the wooded shore stretching as far as the eye can see, bordering this majestic lake edged with rocks, with blue water in its full length. We took the left path that runs along this beautiful coast, cultivated in terraces, with walls up to the top, lined with espaliers. This coast is a treasure for the entire area. It is a masterpiece of nature. In all the villages of Switzerland, a land of mountains and woods, guides are needed to lead. It is a good people for the soldier. We never left without a good piece of ham wrapped in paper. They guided us on our way, for it was easy to get lost. From Lausanne, after circling Lake Geneva, we ascended the Rhône Valley and arrived at Saint-Maurice. From there, we departed for Martigny. All these villages are as unfortunate as can be seen. We took another valley, which could be called the Valley of Hell. There we left the Rhône Valley to take the valley leading to Saint-Bernard, and we arrived at the village of Saint-Pierre, situated at the foot of the Saint-Bernard Gorge. This village consists only of shacks covered with planks, with immensely large barns where we all slept together. There we dismantled our small park, the consul present. We placed our 3 cannons in a trough. At the end of this trough, there was a large mortice to guide our piece, controlled by a strong and intelligent gunner commanding 40 grenadiers. With absolute silence, we had to obey every movement his piece could make. If he said, "Halt," we had to stop. If he said, "Forward," we had to move. In short, he was the master. Everything was ready for the next morning at dawn, and we were given biscuits. I strung them on a cord hanging around my neck. The rosary bothered me a lot. And we were given 2 pairs of shoes. That same evening, our gunner formed his team, consisting of 40 grenadiers per piece, 20 to pull the piece, 10 on each side, holding sticks across the rope that served as a prolong, and the other 20 carried the rifles, wheels, and the caisson of the piece. The consul had the foresight to gather all the mountaineers to collect any pieces left behind, promising them 6 francs per trip and 2 rations per day. By this means, everything was gathered at the rendezvous point, and nothing was lost. In the morning, at daybreak, our master placed us all 20 at our piece, 10 on each side. I found myself first in front, on the right. It was the most perilous side, as it was the side of the precipices, and off we went with our 3 pieces. 2 men carried an axle, 2 carried a wheel, 4 carried the top of the caisson, 8 the chest, 8 others, the rifles. Everyone was occupied, each at his post. This journey was one of the most arduous. From time to time he would say, "Halt," or "Forward," and no one said a word. All this was just for laughs, but upon reaching the snows, it became entirely serious. The path was covered with ice that cut our shoes, and our gunner could not control his piece, which was slipping. We had to haul it back up, requiring all of the man's courage to hold on. "Halt! Forward!" he cried at every moment, and everyone remained silent. We made a league on this arduous path. We had to take a moment to put on shoes, ours were in shreds, and break off a piece of biscuit. As I untied my cord around my neck to take one, the cord slipped, and all my biscuits tumbled into the precipice. What pain for me to be without bread, and my 40 comrades laughed like madmen. "Come on," said our gunner. "We have to collect for my lead horse who understands commands." That made all my comrades laugh. "Come on," they all said. "Each give a biscuit to our lead horse." And joy returned to me. I thanked them wholeheartedly and felt richer than my comrades. Off we went, well shod in new shoes. "Come on, my horses," said our gunner. "To your posts, forward. Let's reach the snows. We'll be better off, with less trouble." We reached these horrors of perpetual snows, and we were better off, our sled gliding more easily. Then General Chambalhac passed and wanted to speed up the pace. He approached the gunner and took on a commanding tone, but was poorly received. "You do not command my piece," said the gunner. "I am responsible for it, so move along. These grenadiers do not belong to you at this moment. I alone command them." He wanted to approach the gunner, but the latter halted. "If you do not move away from my piece," he said, "I will knock you out with a lever. Move, or I will throw you into the precipice." He was forced to move along, and we arrived with tremendous effort at the foot of the convent. 400 paces away, the ascent was very steep, and there we saw that troops had passed before us. The path was cleared. To reach the convent, steps had been formed. We deposited our 3 pieces and entered 400 grenadiers, with some of our officers, into the house of God, where these men devoted to humanity are to help all travellers and offer assistance. Their dogs are always on duty to guide the unfortunate who might fall into snow avalanches and lead them back to this house where all the assistance due to humanity is found. While our officers and colonel were in the rooms with good fires, we received from these venerable men a bucket of wine for 12 men, a quarter of Gruyere cheese, and a pound of bread. We were placed in very wide corridors. These good monks did everything they could for us, and I believe they were well treated. For our part, we shook hands with these good fathers as we left, and we embraced their dogs who caressed us as if they knew us. I cannot find words to express all the veneration I have for these men. Our officers decided to take our pieces down, and our task ended there. Our brave Captain Merlet was designated to lead the 3 companies. We crossed the lake at the foot of the convent, where we saw, in one place, that the ice was broken. The good monk who gave us the tour said it was the first time in 40 years he had seen the water. He shook our captain's hand and saluted us all. We descended steeply. In 2 hours we arrived at Saint-Rémy. This village is entirely in a snowy inferno. The houses are very low and covered with large slabs. We spent the night there. I buried myself in the back of a stable where I found straw, and I spent a good night with about 20 of my comrades. We were not cold. In the morning the recall sounded, and we departed to travel 3 leagues further. Finally we emerged from hell to descend into paradise. "Save your biscuits," our captain told us. "We are not yet in Piedmont. We have difficult passages to reach Italy." We arrived at the rendezvous point for all the regiments, which was a long gorge and a village backed against this mountain. To the right, a steep slope rose to a very high rock. In this plain, all our equipment gathered in 2 days. Our brave officers arrived without boots, their coat sleeves worn out. They were pitiful to see. But this rendezvous was the end of the world, with no road to pass. The first consul arrived and immediately had strong pieces of wood brought. He arrived with all his engineers and had a hole made in this rock, which was at the edge of a precipice. This rock was as if it had been sawed. The first piece of timber was placed in the hole. Another was placed across, the most difficult to do, and a man at the end. When the second piece was placed with beams on the first 2, it was no longer difficult to establish our bridge. Guardrails were placed on the precipice side, and this masterpiece was completed in 2 days. Meanwhile, all our equipment was brought up, and nothing was lost. On the other side, it was easy to descend into the valley leading to Fort Bard, surrounded by rocks. This fort is impregnable. It cannot be breached. It is only a rock and surrounding rocks that dominate it, and cannot be crossed. There the consul took many snuff breaks, and had a lot to do with all his genius. His engineers got to work to pass within range of the cannons. They discovered a path in stone mounds, over 200 fathoms long, and he had it smoothed. This path reached the foot of a mountain, where he had a path made in the side of the mountain with iron tools to pass a horse, but that was not the hardest part. The equipment was there, in a small recess sheltered from the fort, but it could not climb the path. It had to pass near the fort. So he took all measures. He began by placing 2 pieces on the road in front of the fort and had them fired upon. They had to be withdrawn immediately, as a cannonball entered one of our pieces. He sent a parliamentarian to summon the fort commander to surrender, but the response was not in our favour. It had to be handled cleverly. He chose good skirmishers and gave them provisions and cartridges, placing them in crevices, and had niches made in rocks overlooking the fort. Their fire fell on the soldiers' backs. They could not move in their courtyard. The same day he discovered a wide, flat rock to the left of the fort. He had it immediately reconnoitred to mount 2 pieces there. Men, ropes, everything was put to work, and the 2 pieces were placed on this platform, which dominated the fort by over 100 feet. They pummeled it with grapeshot, and the soldiers could not leave their casemates during the day, but our pieces and caissons still had to pass. As soon as Bonaparte learned that the train horses had passed, he made preparations to pass his artillery under the fort's walls. He padded the wheels and anything that could make noise, even our shoes, to avoid alerting the fort. Everything was ready at midnight. The gunners of our demi-brigade requested grenadiers for the artillery passage, and 20 men who had climbed Mont Saint-Bernard were chosen and granted. I was among them. With the same gunner as at the Saint-Bernard passage, he placed me at the head of the first piece, and everyone at their post. We were signalled to depart. We had to move silently. We passed unnoticed. On the other side, we turned sharply to the left. After walking 40 paces along the path, we were shielded by the rock that jutted over the path and masked the fort. We found the horses ready. They were immediately harnessed, and off they went. We returned the same way, tiptoeing in single file, but they heard us and threw grenades over the rampart. As they fell on the other side of the path, we were not hit. We got away with just a scare and returned to retrieve our rifles. That was a mistake. We should have placed our rifles on the caissons and continued on our way. We were exposed, but one cannot think of everything. Upon returning from our arduous task, the colonel complimented us on our success. "I thought you were lost, my brave men." Our captain gathered us in a circle around him and said, "My grenadiers, you have accomplished a great mission. This is a good test for the company." He shook everyone's hand and said to me, "I am pleased with your first performance. I will note it." And he strongly squeezed my arm, repeating, "I am pleased." And we responded, "Captain, we all love you." "Ah, that's good, grenadiers. I will remember. Thank you." We ascended this steep path, and upon reaching the top of the mountain, we saw the beautiful plains of Piedmont. The descent was manageable, and we found ourselves in paradise, marching forced until Turin, where the inhabitants were surprised to see an army arrive with its artillery. It is the best-built city in Europe. It is built on the same model. All houses are alike, with streams of clear water. All streets are straight, magnificent streets. We left the next day for Milan. We did not stay. The march was forced. We entered the beautiful city of Milan, where all the people formed a line to see us. This people is magnificent. The street leading to the Porta Romana is the most beautiful thing to see. Exiting this gate on the right, we found a fully formed camp with all the huts made. We saw there was an army ahead of us. We stacked arms. Corvée men were ordered to fetch provisions, and I was among them. No one could enter the city. I slipped away during the distribution to see the cathedral. The eye cannot see anything comparable. Everything is columns of white marble. I returned to carry my bread sack and received a good distribution. The next morning we left, taking the right path to descend to the Po, a very deep river. There we found a flying bridge that could hold 500 men, and by means of a thick rope crossing the river, we reached the other side by pulling the rope. This took a lot of time, especially for our artillery. We arrived very late on ravaged heights where we spent the night. Our division was sent to Piacenza, a superb city. General Lannes was defeating the Austrians and driving them to the Po, and we were moving on all points without fighting. We were marched everywhere to support the vanguard divisions, and we did not fire a single cartridge. It was all manoeuvres. We descended back to the Po. There the Austrians seized the heights before Montebello. Their artillery ravaged all our advancing troops, and the 24th and 43rd demi-brigades had to march to take control of these positions. Finally, General Lannes overthrew them at Montebello and pursued them until nightfall. The next day, he wished them good morning, and our demi-brigade occupied the heights, which were so hard to take, considering they were twice our number. We set off in the morning to follow the advance guard's movement, and we were placed half a league behind Montebello in a beautiful mulberry plantation in a very wide alley. We stacked arms by battalion. We were enjoying the mulberries, the trees were laden, when around 11 o'clock we heard cannon fire. We thought it was very far. Not at all. It was getting closer. An aide-de-camp arrived to make us advance as quickly as possible. The general was being forced on all sides. "To arms!" said our colonel. "Come on, my brave regiment. Today is our turn to distinguish ourselves." And we shouted, "Long live our colonel! Long live our good officers!" Our captain, with his 174 grenadiers, said, "I vouch for my company. I will be the first at the head." We were placed by sections on the road. We were made to load our weapons while marching. And that's when I put my first cartridge in my rifle. I made the sign of the cross with my cartridge, and it brought me luck. We arrived at the entrance of Montebello village, where we saw many wounded, and then the charge was sounded. I found myself in the first section, in the third rank, due to my height. Exiting the village, a cannon fired grape-shot at us and did no harm. I ducked at the cannon shot, but my sergeant major hit me on my pack with his sabre. "Do not duck," he said. "No," I replied. "The shot fired from that piece," Captain Merle shouted to warn of the second shot, "to the right and left in the ditches." As I had not heard my captain's command, I found myself completely exposed. I ran towards the piece, past our drummers, and fell on the gunners. As they finished loading, they did not see me. I bayoneted all 5 of them, and I jumped on the piece, and my captain embraced me in passing. He told me to guard the piece, which I did, and our battalions threw themselves at the enemy. It was a bayonet carnage, with platoon fire. Our demi-brigade's men had become lions. I did not stay long. General Berthier came at a gallop and said, "What are you doing here?" "General, you see my work. This piece is mine. I took it alone." "Do you want bread?" "Yes, General." He spoke nasally and said to his groom, "Give him bread." Then he took out a small green notebook and asked my name. "Jean-Roch Coignet." "Your demi-brigade?" "96th." "Your battalion?" "First." "The company?" "First." "Your captain?" "Merle." "Tell your captain to bring you to the consul at 10 o'clock. Go find him, leave your piece here." And he rode off. I, very happy, ran to join my company, which had taken a path to the right. This path was sunken, bordered by hedges, and crowded with Austrian grenadiers. Our grenadiers attacked them with bayonets. They were in complete disarray, on all points. I approached my captain and told him I had been noted down. "That's good," he said. "Let's take this gap to reach the front of the company. They might be cut off. They're going too fast. Follow me." I passed through the same gap. 200 paces ahead, on the other side of the path, was a large, wild pear tree, and behind it a Hungarian grenadier waiting to shoot my captain. But as he saw him, he shouted to me, "At you, grenadier!" As I was behind, I aimed at him from 10 paces away. He fell dead, and my captain embraced me. "Do not leave me today," he said. "You saved my life." And we ran to catch up with the front of the company, which was too advanced. A sergeant passed on the other side like us. He was surrounded by 3 grenadiers. I ran to rescue him. They held him and told me to surrender. I handed them my rifle with my left hand and flipped it with my right, plunging my bayonet into one, then into the next. The third was thrown to the ground by the sergeant, who grabbed him by the head and pinned him underfoot. The captain finished the job. The sergeant retrieved his belt and watch and stripped them in turn. We let him recover and dress, and ran to catch up with the front of the company, which was emerging into a large meadow, where the captain took the lead to reunite it with the battalion, still marching at double time. We were burdened with 300 prisoners who had surrendered in the sunken path. They were handed over to death hussars who had survived, having been massacred in the morning. Fewer than 200 of 1,000 remained. Prisoners were taken. No one knew what to do with them. No one wanted to escort them, and they went off on their own. It was a complete rout. They no longer fired at us. They fled like rabbits, especially the cavalry, which had terrified their entire infantry. The consul arrived to see the battle won, and General Lannes covered in blood. He was terrifying, as he was everywhere in the midst of the fire, and it was he who made the last charge. If we had had 2 cavalry regiments, their entire infantry would have been captured. In the evening, the captain took me by the arm, presented me to the colonel, and told him what I had done that day. He replied, "But, Captain, I had no idea." He shook my hand and said, "You must be noted. General Berthier wants to present him to the consul at 10 o'clock tonight," said my captain. "I will take him." "Ah, very well, my grenadier." Arriving near Berthier, my captain said, "Here is my grenadier who took the piece, then saved my life and rescued my first sergeant. He killed 3 Hungarian grenadiers. I will present him to the consul." General Berthier and my captain approached the consul and spoke for a while. I was brought forward. The consul came and took me by the ear. I thought it was to scold me. Not at all. It was affection. Holding my ear, he said, "How long have you served? Today is the first day I saw action." "Ah, that's a good start." "Berthier," he said, "mark him for an honorary rifle. You are too young to be in my guard. It takes 4 campaigns. Berthier, mark him right away and put it in the notes portfolio. Go," he said, "you will join my guard." And my captain took me, and we walked arm in arm as if I were his equal. "Do you know how to write?" he asked me. "No, my captain." "Oh, that's unfortunate for you. Your career would be open. But it does not matter. You will be well noted." "Thank you, my captain." All the officers shook my hand, and the brave sergeant I had rescued came to embrace me in front of the entire company, who congratulated me. How happy I was. Thus ended the Battle of Montebello. This concludes the first part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please consider subscribing for more episodes.